Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. Welcome to a chill stream where I work on a backend node.js application. I'm going to be working on the backend for the Coding Garden community app, which we're currently working on. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Let's say hello to all the wonderful people. Hello Brian, welcome to the stream. Hello Conrad. Hello Elia. Hello Amadou. Hello Wally Oxen. Hello Josh. Hello Pintanero. Sergi. Hello, Jesus. BZ, what's up? And hello, Avi12. Avi asks, have you ever developed an Office add-in using JavaScript? No, but long time ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, I worked on one with C#, because I think it's .NET based, but I've never done anything with JavaScript. Hello, Kakashi. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Felix. Hello, Amadou. Awesome. Hello, Katoli. Hello, Chris Perez. Hello, Michael Homan. The gang's all here. All right. Hello, Ran. Anybody else? Hello, Abunga. Hello, Motivation Maxed Out. Hello, Joe. Cool. Keep saying hello, and I will recognize you as we go through this. Hello, Simjohn. Welcome. Okay, so if you're not familiar, the Coding Garden community app is a mobile app with a API backend that we are building as a community. Ultimately, it's just going to be a mobile app that has like Coding Garden announcements, news, you can watch videos, you can see frequently asked questions. Eventually, we're going to build forum-like features into it, so you can ask questions, you can post code snippets and stuff like that. But our initial MVP, minimum viable product, is just showing frequently asked questions, showing all the contributors of the app, and then I think we'll have a history of Coding Garden page. So there's a flurry of activity working on the various pieces of it, but I wanted to do some work today on the backend, which is a Node.js API. So this is the backend, and we have a Trello board that's managing all of the work that's happening here. And I actually created a ticket for what I'm going to do today, which I'm just calling Cleanup Backend Repo. I'm going to basically make it a lot easier for other people to start contributing, make some code reusable, have some nice error messages, that kind of thing. So I have a checklist of things I'm going to do today, and that's the plan. So it's going to be fun. Hello, Brian. Welcome to the stream. Hello, JG. Hello, Shifranim. Hello, Chandra. Cool. All right, let's do it. So I have this repo cloned down locally here, and currently I'm on the develop branch. I have a nice little thing in my terminal that tells me what branch I'm on. I did some videos a month ago, 2 months ago, that showed our feature branch workflow, but basically what we do is whenever we're working on something, we check out a feature branch that has the name of the ticket that we're working on. So this ticket has card number CA-86. So I am going to check out a branch called CA-86. And this is where I'm going to do all of my work. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to push it up to that branch on GitHub and create a pull request. And then others will code review it and approve it before it gets merged into develop. And we also have some automation set up where anything that gets merged into develop automatically gets deployed to this api-dev.coding.garden. So all of the work I do today, once it gets merged in, it'll immediately be deployed to our dev URL. Cool. So I have that branch. Let's do some work. The first thing I wanted to do was create an example.env file. The main reason for this is when someone else wants to use this repo, they should know what env parameters they need to specify. I don't think I have anything secret in here. Yeah, I don't. And right now we just have a few basic ones, but in the future we might actually add some more. So things like Mongo URI, which is the database we're connecting to, admin secret, which right now is just a static secret that's used to do some of the administration functions. In the future, we'll have like admin login and things like that. But for now, we're just checking against a simple secret. But what I want to do is create an example file so that when other people clone this repo down, they can copy this and put their information inside of it, because this file here could potentially have secret information. Like it could have an actual deployed Mongo database. It could have a secret that we're using in production, and we don't want this stuff committed to the repo. So right now you can see how it's not highlighted. It's kind of grayed out because it actually isn't in our repo. But I'm going to add a file that is in the repo that gives an example of what you would need in your .env. So let's create a new file here. We'll call it .env.sample. You can call this literally whatever you want. What people will do is once they clone it down, they're going to copy this file to a file named .env. And for now, what I have in my .env is pretty much what you can use in your example file. Like I said, in the future, we'll have more of these, but for now, this is pretty much all we need. But the thing about that is now env.sample will actually be in the repo, and then someone who clones it can copy it. So I'll probably update the README. Yeah, so running the API locally, there's ways to do it. Prerequisites via Docker. We'll add just like a setup section where we will say, copy the .env file and update accordingly. And we'll make that look like code. We'll add like a little shell script here. Basically, copy .env.sample to .env. So people know this is what you have to do. And another point about that is if someone, for whatever reason, is using a different database name or they have MongoDB running on a different port, this is where they would change that to change how the code actually connects to the database. So that's good to go. Cool. Let's catch up on the chat. Katoli says, save something for me. I think he's mentioning in terms of contributing to the app, but there's plenty of work to do. Jesus is asking, how can I contribute to the app? First, I would go to GitHub and then go to our wiki and read all about the project. So if you go into the wiki, you can see what it is, what we're doing. You can see our code of conduct, contribution guidelines, all that good stuff. I'll share that right here. And if you look at my stream history, there's been a couple of streams where I talk about what we're doing here. They're pretty long, but you can get kind of some background on the project itself. We have a dedicated Discord where we can communicate with the stuff that we're working on. And we actually have a few people that have been designated as kind of like team leads for front end, back end, DevOps, that kind of thing. But you go here, you can find out how to join the Discord. Once you join the Discord, we'll have links to all this stuff. But there's plenty of stuff to work on. Cool. Motivation Maxed Out says, just to let you know, I binged watched your 8-hour forum creation stream and watched your Trello clone this morning. I appreciate that. I remember that 8-hour stream was when I got to 1,000 subscribers, and it was a fun like hangout stream, but I did not get very far in that app. Not as far as I wanted to. The Trello clone was pretty fun though. Hello, Steepo. Welcome for the first time. Yeah, and BZ was asking, is there a repo right now? There are several repos. So the way we have this split up is we have our wiki with all the information. We have our backend repo, which has our node.js API. We have our app mobile, which is a React Native app. We have app frontend, which doesn't have anything in it now, but in the future, that'll be like a web-based frontend. We also have this contributors repo, which is where we actually get the contributor information from. So once you've made some commits and helped out with the app, you can actually add your information as a pull request to this JSON file, and the mobile app actually pulls this information in to show all of the contributors. Cool. Yeah, so that's that. Next thing I want to do is validate the .env with Joy. So basically what I'll do is I'm going to create a config script that pulls in the .env when the app starts up. And if it's missing any of the required things, like if it's missing Mongo URI or admin secret, we won't let the app start. It'll like throw an error so that locally developers will know, oh, hey, I need to update the .env. Let's see, do we have Joy in here as a dependency yet? We don't. So let's install it. And wait, are we using npm? No, we're using yarn. So I want to use yarn. Make sure I use yarn to install this. Katoli asks, how is it going with your job, CJ? It's really good. I'm enjoying it. I get to work on cool stuff. I get to work from home every now and then. It's a cool place. I like it. It's good. Oh, I forgot. I use this thing called Verdaccio, which is a local npm server. And so whenever I do a yarn add or an npm install, this thing has to be running for it to install the packages. But the cool thing about that is because it's running locally, it caches all of the packages. So once you install something, if you install it again somewhere else, it's like almost instant because it's like a local npm server rather than a remote one. Cool. Okay, so we installed Joy. Now what I want to do is create a config file. So we do have this config folder. And right now it's just exporting an object with the stuff predefined. But what I want to do in here is bring in the .env, validate that the .env has all of the properties that we require, and then export an object with those properties on it. So let's do this. We're going to bring in Joy. And we're going to create a schema. And Joy, we're going to say it's an object. And it has the following properties. It has node.env. And we'll say we can do joy.string.required. And I think we can give it like a default value. So like default will be development. So if they didn't specify the node env environment variable, will default to development. And also we can say like what should be allowed. Let's do this. We're gonna put this on the next line. So we'll only allow development, test, and production. Maybe we'll add some others in the future, like staging, but I think typically I use development when we're in staging just so I can see all of the logs and everything like that, but that should make sure that node.env is there. And then we also want to make sure that Mongo URI is specified. So this is a required string. And then lastly, admin secret is also a required string. Yeah, we do want trailing commas. Cool. And I think I can basically tell it to allow anything, like allow other properties as well, but these are the things that we care about right now. Forget what it's called. I'm gonna have to look at the docs. Like extra, optional keys. Yeah, I need to look it up, but basically we want to say, okay, this is the schema, but if there are other things, that's okay. We just want to make sure that it has these three properties. Let's look at the Joy docs. Extra, allow. Wonder if anyone in the chat knows. In this example, with, without, unknown. I think that's what it is, like unknown properties. Yeah. Object schema.unknown overrides the handling of unknown keys for the scope of the current object only. So I'm going to say unknown true. So allow unknown things. Okay. And then we're going to validate this thing. So we'll say joy.validate validate. And we pass in, what are we validating? In this case, we're validating process.env because that's the thing that's going to have all of the properties inside of it. And our schema is that given schema. So one thing we'll do in this file is, before we do all of this, is we will pull in our .env. So we're just going to require the .env package, which is already installed, and say config. And what that does is it looks for a .env file. If it exists, it pulls it in. And then we have our schema, we validate it. Let's look at the return of validate. So yeah, we get error and value. We'll destructure it. And let's call this config. And we're just going to module.exports the config. Now, I don't know if these things are being used elsewhere in the app. If they are, we're going to update it to use this instead. So I'm just going to comment this out for now and see if anything breaks. But this is basically what we want. And then we can check, okay, if there is an error, for one, let's just log it. And we'll throw the error so the app actually quits. That. Cool. Now, in our index.js, this thing is pulling in the .env. We don't want to do that anymore because once we pull in the config, it's going to do that. And aha, I see it. This is where it's using port and host, like so. So let's actually add those to our .env file. We'll say port. And what were we defaulting to before? 3000. That's fine. And host, we're going to default that to 0.0.0.0. So that way it listens on localhost and your IP address, your local and your external IP address as well. So we actually want these to be in there as well. And then in our config, we need to default those. So we'll say port is a joy string. It's required. And we're going to default to 3000 if it's not specified. And host is a required string. And we're going to default to this if it's not specified. Cool. I think that should do it. And now this thing will actually throw an error if it's missing. Right now there's nothing missing, so I actually have nodemon running, or I thought I did. Let me start it. Cool. Cannot destructure property server of undefined or null. Cool. So now that we changed the way this thing is being exported, we should use it differently. So here's what we can do. From our config, we're actually pulling in port and host. I think that's what we called it. Yeah, port and host. And that's what we'll use instead. So this will be all caps port, and this will be all caps host. So let's actually log what gets validated here, the config. Go. Okay, so our main file here. You know what? I think we should definitely require in the config before we do anything else, because those other things might be dependent on it, and we want our config to do the validation when this thing first starts up. Yeah, and then helper's database connection. Let's see how it's doing it. Yeah, and then this is doing this, but really we actually want to get Mongo URI from the config. Cool. So that's good. This isn't, I don't think this is running for whatever reason. Loading config ... Because this should run right here. Oh, okay. So loading config, undefined. So we're not actually getting back anything from our validation. Config is undefined. That's not good. Oh, because it's actually named value. I messed up here. So I should say, okay, it's value, but we're going to rename it to be config. There we go. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there because it's the entire .env. Cool. And now we need to also update here how this thing is logging because it's using host and port, but those we are now calling host and port. Like so. Great. Okay, so it's loading it in, it's validating it, but let's show what happens if it is invalid. So, okay, that's there. But what if in our .env, or what if our .env was just completely and totally empty? Like that. And typically, you do have to restart the app if you change your .env. But, okay, .env is empty. Now we try to run the app. We should get an error. Yeah, validation error, child port fails because port is required. Whoa. I think right here I just want to log the message. Here we go. So you start it, and then, okay, so we see child port fails because port is required. And let's give it like a nice error message here. Missing, well, actually, missing property in config. Cool. I think that's good enough. So if somebody starts up the app, they then realize that they're missing stuff. And so if I put that stuff back, restart the app, it starts up just fine. Cool. Okay. Let's catch up on the chat. Cool. Motivation Maxed Out asks, can you do a 30-second explanation on Vuetify? I love components, but I don't understand Vuetify. Yes, I can try to do a 30-second explanation of Vuetify. So you may be familiar with material design from Google. Material design is a design specification. They basically came up with all of the rules for how material design should work. They decided how buttons should look. They decided how user interaction with buttons should be. They decided how cards would look. There's basically all these rules around the design, but it's just a specification. So material design from Google just specifies this is how to do it. It's not an actual implementation. So it's not CSS, it's not JavaScript, it's just a design language. And then other people have taken that design language and turned it into something that we can use as actual code. So people have created CSS libraries like Materialize CSS that takes that specification and actually turns it into code that we can use. And there are others. There's Material Design Lite. So those are implementations. And then if you take that one step further, if you're working in a front-end framework that has components like React or Vue or Angular, Vuetify is a component library. So they implement the design specification, but not only did they create all of the CSS, they also created custom components. So now instead of adding classes to elements, you can say md-button. And that's a component that gives you a styled material design button, or md-toolbar, or md-card. It's probably not that for Vuetify, but basically Vuetify is Vue components that implement the material design spec. And Vuetify just has tons and tons of them that you can import in and use in your app. So that's Vuetify. And there are others out there. I believe there's Material Design Vue. For React, there's Material UI, which is what I use a lot at work. There are a lot of them out there. BZ is asking, how often do I do live streams? Lately, it hasn't been that often, mainly because I've been moving. I bought a house. I'm actually going to do some moving after the stream, and work has been a little bit busy, but I found an opening, so just today I decided to stream. Eventually, once I move in fully and I get my house set up, it is my intention to stream a lot more. Cool. Conrad asks, "Do I ever think about trying out a software idea as a startup?" I've thought about it a lot, but um, it's funny because I'm rewatching Silicon Valley right now. I've watched it before, but now I'm watching it from the beginning, and I don't know. I don't want to just uh, build something to get investors and then get acquired and make a bunch of money. Like my mentality is like I want to work on something that I actually care about and that will actually matter and do something useful. And I haven't really come across any ideas that fit that yet. But eventually, I think I'd like to do something like that. Paramjit, hello, welcome to the stream. Today we are working on a node.js application. It's for the Coding Garden community app. If you scroll up, there's a link to the wiki, but I'm basically working on the node.js backend here. Cool. Avi12 has asked, have you ever used gRPC? It sounds familiar, but actually, is that... so if you're working on an Electron app, is that the idea that the main thread and the UI thread are running on different threads? So in order to communicate, you have to use like RPC communication. I think that's what that is. I've done like a little bit of it. Steepo asks, do you think knowledge of Linux/Unix like systems is needed for a good developer? I don't think it's needed, but it's only going to make you a better developer. Before I really started writing code, I set up Linux on all of my machines, like my laptops and my desktops. I got really used to using the terminal and like understanding how a Linux machine works. So now, as a developer, it really helps if I'm debugging a deploy or I need to SSH into a server and configure something. So I don't think it's needed, but it is a huge help. Like it does not hurt to have that knowledge as a developer. Cool. Yeah, Motivation Maxed Out asks, is it possible to create a local MongoDB database instead of just on the internet? Yes, and so the app that I'm working on right now, when I run it locally, it's just connected to a MongoDB running on my machine. If you have a Mac, you can do brew install MongoDB, and that will actually just install MongoDB right on your machine. And with a library like Mongoose or Monk, you can connect directly to it and put data inside of it. We have this thing deployed, and when it's deployed on the internet, it actually needs a deployed database as well. And so we're using imlab for the deployed database. But locally, yeah, it's just connecting to a database on my machine. Avi12 asks, what do you think is the best way for programming in JavaScript? My code is usually messy. It's a tough question. I think about it a lot though, because in the app, one of the apps I'm working on at work right now, I'm using open source libraries, but they haven't been updated in like 2-3 years. So they're usable, but there are certain things that I want to add to them. And then while I'm in there changing things to maybe like add and make a pull request, I kind of just want to rewrite the whole thing because it's using, maybe like they don't have a linter set up, or it's using, I wouldn't say old JavaScript, but it's just using like ES5 instead of like the latest JavaScript features. That isn't required. Like if it works, it works. But I think like my biggest pain point working in libraries like that is like not having a consistent code style in a linter. Because in a one that I'm going to make a pull request to, I added a linter and it just went crazy. Like there are variables that are unused, there are inconsistent semicolon usage. There are some things they're doing that the Airbnb config, ESLint config, disagrees with, and for like very good reasons. Like it might actually introduce security things. So in terms of the best way, I would say start with a linter. That's going to help you keep a consistent code style. And then it comes into actually how do you write code and solve problems. And I think that just comes with time. as long as I've been coding, I just strive for reusability and modularity. It's like no matter what, you're always going to need to reuse something or add something to it. And if you're thinking about that ahead of time, you write better code because you write it for your future self when you need to change it later or add on to it later. I don't know. I should probably start coding. I've been talking a lot. Let's see. Hello, Batar. Welcome to the stream. Motivation Maxed Out asks, "What's the most difficult website you would think to make a clone of, and can you give an example website? For example, Instagram or something like that." I mean, I think just making something like Facebook, like it's an entire social network. Like if you're just building it for yourself and to learn, it doesn't necessarily have to be that complex. But if you think about it, like there's a news feed, there are user profile pages, which have multiple embedded pages. There's a live chat. There are different types of pages. So there's pages for like musicians, pages for events. There's just a lot going on there. So it would take a lot of planning before you start building something like that. Instagram is an interesting thing to build because you have to worry about like photo uploads, multiple users, sharing content. The most difficult thing I could think to build, I think probably YouTube, but doing your own video processing and like video storage, because that is also a hard problem to solve. I think there are services you can, like, and APIs that you can subscribe to that let you do stuff like that, but you could actually implement your own server-side video encoding and file storage mechanism and streaming mechanism. Yeah, that would be tricky. YouTube. I say YouTube is a very hard thing to build. Yeah. There's a lot of people in the chat. Welcome everyone. Happy Saturday. It's not Sunday yet. Pranjal asks, "Can you suggest the best charting library to use with Node.js?" Well, typically Node.js is either server-side or like it doesn't have a UI. So if you mean JavaScript and the front end, I've used Chartist, which is nice. Let's look at it. Simple responsive charts. I'll say they're not very customizable. So like you get what you get, but they look really nice. There's also Chart.js, which I think has probably a bigger user base and more support. And I think they have plugins that make the stuff responsive. I would choose between those two. I would say don't use D3 because D3 is a lot lower level. If you do want to use D3, use something like C3.js. C3 is a wrapper on top of D3 that gives you higher level chart components. They don't look as nice as those other ones that I showed. And actually, if you look way back, like a few months ago, I did a stream where I compared a few different charting libraries, so check that out. Katoli asks, "Where are you moving?" I'm just moving like 4 miles away from where I'm at right now. I was renting this house and actually bought a house. I've been looking to buy a house for a few years, but I bought a house. So I'm still in Denver. Someone asks, "Have I tried Adonis.js?" I haven't, but someone recommended it to me on Twitter. And I looked at it. You can see the link is purple because I've clicked it before. But I haven't really built anything with it. It looks cool. It seems like they have a lot of cool built-in stuff. Yeah. Someone asked, "What do I think about JEE?" Is that the Java Enterprise environment or something? I don't think highly of it, I'll say that. Kakashi is asking, "Can you create an app like WebTorrent?" That would be fun to do. I've actually... So, if you haven't seen it before, WebTorrent is a streaming browser for the web. So it actually lets a web browser connect to peers. I think the other peers actually have to be web-based as well, but it's like a torrent client that's running inside of your browser, which is pretty sweet. And Yeah, there's some other libraries. Like there's this PureFlix server, which I use every now and then, that will actually let you stream torrents, but it's all JavaScript based. Yeah, streaming torrent client for Node.js with a web UI. And I think under the hood, this is using torrent stream. No, based on torrent stream. I don't know. It would be fun to do. It's a cool concept. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna get back to coding. There is a question about the code that I'm writing. For the admin secret, this question comes from Robert. If this were a real world app, would you use a generator or a specific phase or phrase? I think they meant. I would use something really long and unguessable, because the way this works is when there's one admin route right now which seeds the database, and it is protected. I believe you can see in our routes. Let's see, admin. Wait. Oh, it's protected right here. So, all of the routes here have a protection for this in this middleware called isAdmin, and basically isAdmin just checks to see if there is a header that matches that admin secret. So if we look at our middlewares, this gets the header and then compares it directly against admin secret. So anybody that knows what the admin secret is could seed the database or any of the other routes that we add to the admin endpoint, admin route. Now, this is not the best way to do it. It is fairly secure as long as admin secret is super long and unguessable and no one knows what that is, because basically if you know what that is, you can get to the admin routes. Eventually, we're going to add real auth on top of this. You actually have to log in with a username and a password, which actually gets hashed in a database and all of that. But for now, this is like a simple level of security that just makes sure that if you're hitting these routes, you have the correct admin secret. Cool. Question from Aiden, why are you not committing package-lock.json? Because we've decided to use Yarn. And we don't want conflicting lock files. So there was a lot of deliberation about like how all of this was going to get set up, and ultimately we decided on Yarn. So the Yarn lock is the source of truth. If you use npm locally, and apparently I have sometime to install dependencies, but Yarn lock is the source of truth, and that's why we don't ignore that one. Yeah. Okay, there are a lot of questions. I think I'm gonna miss some. Yeah, I'm gonna get back to coding. So where were we? We were here. Validate the env with joy. Okay, I just want to make sure that nowhere else in the app is what do you call it? Like using other config values. So we can get rid of these logs here. Yeah. Actually, instead of throwing the error, I think I'm just going to do process.exit. Let me see what that would do. So let's say I get rid of port. Well, no, I think that has a default value. Let's say I get rid of admin secret. Yeah. So now it's not like a big log. It just says missing property in config. Child admin secret fails because admin secret is not allowed to be empty. So I like that because instead of throwing like a gigantic error, it just shows the explicit error so people will know what to do. Okay, I'm going to look at the other files and just make sure that the config isn't really being used in anything else. These are our routes, that's fine. We're requiring the config first, so it loads the .env and all of that. This brings in the database connection. The database connection brings in the config, which would run all of the validations if it hadn't been run yet, so that's good. We're using Mongo URI. That's good. That's good. Okay, I think we're good here. So we just have some basic validation, and now when people clone this thing down, they will need to make a copy of this, update with their values, and then the config should be happy. So that's good. All right, what's next? Setup 404 and error middlewares. So right now, a lot of our routes are, if there is some sort of error, they're just handling that error response themselves. So let's take a look at, I think, for example, contributors. Let's see. Yeah, so the way contributors works is it makes a request to GitHub to get that JSON file that has all of the contributors inside of it. But if for whatever reason this fetch fails, we have this try catch here. And then this actually sets the status and sends back JSON. What I want to do is set up an error handling middleware in my main app so that I don't have these res.jsons all over the place for sending the error messages. We have one consistent place that sends back the error response, and here we'll just use next to forward that error onto the error handler. So let's do that. In our middlewares, we're going to create a new function. We'll just call it error handler. And the way this works in Express is if it has 4 parameters instead of 3. So typically a middleware has rec, res, and next. But if a middleware has 4, then it's an error handler. So with 4, you have error, rec, res, and next. Cool, like that. And this is what we will do. So first thing is we want to set the status code to like 500 or something if it hasn't been set yet. So let's just say status code. So if res.status code is a thing, we're going to use that. Well, actually, here. If res.status code is equal to 200. So what actually will happen is if someone doesn't set an error status code whenever they forward onto the error middleware, we're just going to default to a 500 status code. So if the status code is equal to 200, then we'll set it to 500. Else, it should just be res.status code. And I think that should be okay. The way you might see some people do this in an Express app is they will actually put the status code on the error object itself, and then you could just use that. But I think we're going to make people do res.status, so it'll actually set the status code. Okay, so we have our status code, and then here's what where we'll just do a res.json. We want it to have a message. This is just going to be error.message. We want it to have, we'll include the status code. And before that, we just want to make sure that we do res.status status code so that the status code gets set in the response. And lastly, we'll include the stack trace if we're not in production. So we'll say stack is if process.env.node.env is equal to production, then we're going to give them a pancake stack. That's not right. My emoji window is being weird. There we go. That's the one I want. Okay. Pancake. There we go. So if we're in production, we don't want to show the stack trace. Else we'll show error dots. We'll actually show the stack trace. Cool. And we don't want to remove this 4th parameter because in Express having 4 parameters is how it knows that this is an error handler. So what we'll do is we'll actually ignore that ESLint rule. Disable, what is it called? No unused vars. And then we will re-enable it immediately afterwards. Okay, so we have our error handler middleware, and what we're going to do is in our main file, we're going to import it in, and we'll put it as the last middleware in the stack. So we'll do that right here. We'll say error handler equals require middlewares, and then as the very last thing, and it's important that we have this as the very last thing because this will be the last thing that catches any errors that got forwarded on. We'll just say app.use error handler. Great. So now what we can do is actually use that thing. And let's see it working. So if we look in the API, there is, let's take, for example, the contributors route here that lists all the contributors. We are just going to throw an error so that it always fails, just to show what the error looks like right now. And then we're going to change it to use our error handler. So throw new error, testing existing errors. Okay, so this throws an error, it goes into the catch, and then this immediately just responds with JSON. So let's see it happen. So if we go localhost 3000/contributors, are we running? Oh, we're not. We have to restart it. Okay, we're cool. And now we go here. So we see this is what it looks like because that specific handler has decided to say, okay, you have the status and you have the message. But we want things to be consistent. So instead of doing that, we will just forward the error on to the error handler so that the one that we wrote will actually handle it. So here we also need to include next. So next is how you forward on to an error handler. And now instead of doing like res.json, we'll do this. So if the error is an instance of range error, meaning it wasn't found, we're going to set the status to 404, and then we'll just say next with the error, and we'll return that. And now instead of doing res.json, we'll just do that. And then similarly, we'll do this here. And actually, because if you remember in our error handler, we're defaulting to error code 500, now I can just leave that off here. Now I can just say return next with error. And that will then forward it. It'll see, oh, the status code is still 200, so it'll set it to 500. Really, this is all about reusability. So now that I've done this, in every other route handler that I create, if I need to handle an error, I can just say next, pass in the error, and my error handler makes sure it's in like a consistent format. So now, if I do this, we see it still errors out, but now we see message, status code, and we see the stack trace. I believe Simjohn is watching. Maybe this was called status for a reason, and maybe that's what we'll call it instead of status code, but let's do that. So in our middleware for our error handler, instead of calling this status code, let's just call this status. And now we see message, status, and the stack trace. Cool. Yeah, that's great. And now I'll make it not always throw an error. Cool. And this actually should work, so we won't get the error. Yeah, so it actually gives back the contributors. Cool. But now, with that handy little middleware, I'm going to update the other route handlers to use that instead of doing their own thing. So if we look at the frequently asked questions controller, yeah, it's doing something similar. So if there's a reference error, we set the status code, etc., etc. So now instead, we're just going to use our error handler. So we can handle it in the same way. So if error is an instance of a reference error, actually, I thought of a better way to do this too. So we'll do res.status 404, and then we'll just do next with the error. And actually, we can do that in the other one. I think the reason that they were returning it was because of a consistent return. But technically, we can leave this one off. because it sets the status to 404. And then this forwards the error on. So that should be all we need. Set the status to 404, forward the error on. Cool. And I think similarly in my admin controller, yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. So next, and then we'll just forward on the error. And again, I'll mention it, but this is all about reusability. So instead of having res.json all over the place where maybe one developer decides that there should be a message on the error and another one decides that there should be, I don't know, something else. Now, by forwarding the error, it's always handled in one place and it always looks the same way. So that's good. I think similarly, I have this isAdmin middleware. And here, instead of doing res.json, I want to use the error handler middleware. So this is where I would do next, but I actually have to create my own error. So we'll say error is a new error. And the message is you are unauthorized. And then we can just forward on that error, which will eventually get caught by the error handler here. And so we can see that in action if we try to go to /admin, unauthorized, status code 401, and then we see the stack trace. Cool. So now, anytime someone creates any sort of route handler, they should be using the error middleware to just forward the error on, and you shouldn't do res.json there. So that'll be part of our code review process when we're reviewing new updates that come in for this. That's great. Okay. Cool. Not quite done yet because I still want to set up a 404 handler, because watch what happens when you request something that doesn't exist. You get back just like this text. And because this is an API, I want to make sure that every response, no matter what, is a JSON response. So for this, I'm going to set up a middleware that will catch if something was requested that wasn't found, and then it will create a 404 error and then forward that on to the error handler that we just created. All right. Let's catch up on the chat. I know there's a ton of it. There's a lot of people watching. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about Yarn. Pranjal is asking, what does a developer do in DevOps? Stack Overflow 2019 survey tells the most satisfied developers were DevOps developers. Typically, DevOps has to do with deploying applications into various environments, managing those deployments, configuring servers, automating all of that process. So like the process that we have where once a pull request gets created, we actually have a continuous integration server that will run tests and run the linter. And if it fails, then we'll actually see a red X there. Typically, DevOps are the people that set up the continuous integration server. And then there's also a part of the continuous integration and continuous deployment where if this pull request gets merged in, it will automatically get deployed to a dev URL. DevOps people would be the ones that set all of that up. Simjohn, who's on part of the core team, actually set up a bit of the DevOps stuff we have going on here. Yeah, I'm sure they do a lot more, and I'm sure if Simjohn is watching, he can throw in the chat what he does. But typically, it's all about server setup, automation, configuration, that kind of thing. Hello, Adam Coder. Welcome to the stream. Joe asked, have you ever thought of getting into blockchain tech? Not really. Not really. I'll just say that. Justin says, congrats on buying a house. Thank you so much. I'm excited. Sandeep asked your thoughts on the Go language. It looks cool. I think I've wrote like one thing in it once. Maybe I'll learn it. I don't know, but it looks cool. Yeah, so Pranjal is saying, as a student developer in India, most companies are looking for Java developers and not JavaScript developers. Yeah, I mean, and if your main goal is finding a job in that market, then you might want to learn Java. I mean, it's not difficult. and it is in demand. I think no matter where you go, that people want Java developers. Like enterprise level companies want Java developers. Katoli is asking, can I create an epic story on the Trello board? You could, just make sure there's a good reason for it. I would throw a message in the Discord, and we'll see if that makes sense. Typically, epics are larger stories that all of these other stories are underneath. You can see that each of these has various tasks under it. Some of the stories aren't linked to epics, but they probably should be. But yeah, throw a message in the Discord, and we'll see if we should create it. James is asking, do companies ever hire juniors for back-end roles? It depends. Katoli says, of course, like, it's interesting because a lot of companies kind of take the mentality that, like, I wouldn't say a lot. There are some companies that take the mentality that as a junior developer, you should only be working on the front end because you might mess stuff up on the back end. I mean, not all companies think that way. You can... Any junior developer is essentially in an apprentice role. They're like there to learn. So you can learn as a junior dev to be a backend developer, to like write SQL queries, to write API routes, that kind of stuff. So I would say not all companies are that way, but having taught students and worked with students that were trying to get jobs in industry, I have seen a little bit of that where a company considers a junior developer to be more of like front end rather than back end, but I don't think it should be that way. That's what I'll say about that. Yeah. Yeah, some people are mentioning in terms of disabling linter rules, you can do ESLint disable next line, and that will disable the linter rule for the next line. I like to be a little bit more explicit about it because disable next line would disable all possible rules for that line, and I want to make it explicit to say that I'm only ignoring this one rule for this line. In this case, it's the only rule that it's violating, but still, I like it to be explicit. Yeah. Hello, Mario from Italy. Sukjit says, hello, looking tired? I'm looking tired? I might be. I went skateboarding at like 9 o'clock this morning, and it was already like super hot outside. And I'm going to be doing some moving later. I might look a little tired. Is it the eyes? Hello, Ed. Welcome to the stream. What have you missed? I created a validator for our configuration. I created an error handling middleware, and I updated all of the routes to use it. I think that's about it. Oh, Zimba is saying ESLint disable next line, and then you can put the what do you call it? The rule name on there. I did not know that, so we could change this to be ESLint disable next line. There we go. I like that. Yeah. It's working. Cool. Appreciate that. Pranjal asks, why don't you apply for Google? There actually is a Google campus in Boulder, Colorado, which is not too far from where I am. I don't want to commute to Boulder. Also, I like working for a small company. Google is a really, really big company. I work at a company where they're like, right now, I'll say there's less than 20 employees. So I like that. It's small. Everybody knows everybody. There's not a lot of politics or bureaucracy. Yeah. Okay. Next thing I wanted to do was work on a 404 middleware. This one actually will be very simple. So we'll create a not found rec res and next. All this does is it creates an error that says not found. And we might include the URL that they were requesting. So I believe we can do rec.original URL. So that way the URL that wasn't found will be in the error message. And then we'll do res.status 404. and then we'll forward on that error handler. So what this does is if this middleware gets hit, it creates an error that says what you were looking for at that URL was not found, sets the status code to 404, and then forwards onto the error handler. Ultimately, it'll hit this and then return an error response. So now in our main file here, we're going to bring in not found. No, yeah, not found. And I just realized I'm bringing in middlewares twice. So really, I could just do this. And now not found should be used right before the error handler. And so the way Express middlewares work is they're kind of top down. So a request comes into our application here, and then it's going through all of the middlewares. It's seeing if it matches any of these. And then if it doesn't, it's going to first hit not found. So that's how the not found middleware works. It's the second to last middleware in the stack. And if a request came in that it couldn't satisfy, it hits this. We set the status code, we create an error message, and then the error handler will respond with an error message. So now, if I go to a route that's not found, instead of seeing text, we should see nothing because the app crashed. Let's see. App.use requires a middleware function. Oh, I forgot to export it. So in our middlewares, we need to make sure we export the not found handler as well. Okay, so now we request it, and there we go. So we see the message is not found. That's the URL that you were requesting. The status code is 404, and then we see the stack trace. So that's good. All right, so we have our middlewares. Next thing is to add a colors library for logging. So one thing I noticed, I actually hadn't done this before. I think it was Kaizen who set this up. But if you look at some of the logs that are in here, there are these really weird characters and escape sequences. And actually what those are colors for the terminal. So you can see that when it says server started, it shows up as blue. And when it says connected to database, let's look at our database connection. That shows up as yellow. The only thing is these are very hard to read and you can't really understand them. So I'm going to install a library that makes it very explicit what's actually happening here. And it's literally just called colors. Yeah, get colors in your node.js console. Like that. So you can do like colors.green, colors.red, that kind of thing. So you install it, and then it actually adds it to the string prototype, which some people aren't a fan of. And if you don't like that, you can have it so that you actually have to pass it into a function. But let's install this. So we'll do yarn add colors. Conrad is asking, is there documentation on these color codes? There are. And the way I found it was I literally just searched for that. Standard ANSI colors in terminals. And you can see some here. There's probably a lookup table somewhere. ANSI code for debug messages. Well, this is like C. Yeah, I think this is C or C++ code. But I'm sure there's a lookup table somewhere. But what you should search for is ANSI color codes. ANSI color codes terminal, something like that. Ultimately, inside of this colors.js library, it has a whole table of all of those, I'm sure. Okay, so we have colors. Now let's use it. So I know right here we wanted this to be a, I think it's yellow for the connected to database. Yeah, yellow. Let's look how the library is used. Yeah, so I'm going to do it where it attaches to the string prototype. A lot of people don't like this, but I'm going to do it. So basically, in our main file, no, you know what? No, we're going to do it the safe way. Because that way, if you want to use it, you have to require it in. We're going to do it the safe way. So we'll bring in colors. And then how this will work is instead of doing this, we can do colors.yellow. Cool. Instead of process.standardout.write, I am just going to do a console.log. I don't know if there was a reason that they just... Oh, maybe because there was a linter rule around no console. It is just a warning, though. And I'm guessing this is red. Let's just assume that if it's an error, it's going to be red. Yeah. Okay, so that still shows up as yellow. That's good. Let's, like, cause it to have a database error. Let's, like, give it a weird connection string. See what happens. Yeah, and it's all red. That's awesome. Okay, so if it's good, it's yellow. If it's bad, it's red. Where else did we have this? Oh, yeah, in our main index.js. Server started, and I think that's a blue color. It's actually pretty hard to read in my terminal. Maybe I'll change that. But we'll bring in the colors. And we'll change this to a console.log. And I wonder if we have like a light blue. Oh, there's rainbow. Let's try rainbow. Yeah, server started. Let's not do that. I guess if we do blue. Yeah. It's just for me, it's hard to read because I have like a dark black background. Trap drops the base. Let's try that one. Nice. That's funny. What if we... I mean, green is like my default color. Oh, interesting. They have themes for like errors and warnings. Actually, yeah, let's do cyan. I think that was an option. Okay, so it's easier for me to read. But now I'm thinking if someone is using like a white terminal, that might be harder to read. I don't know. I'm going to use that. Cool. Let me check and make sure there were... I think there was one other place where this is being used, like in our seed file. Yeah, right here. DB seeded with frequently asked question data. I think that's yellow. We're going to say it's yellow. And we need to require in colors, not that. Cool. And let's try running the seeds. We should see that. Yeah. Cool. Let me just double check it's not being used anywhere else, but I think that's mainly it. I'll just search for standard out, which is what people were using before. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's look at my checklist. I think I have one more thing. I'm going to set up tests. Yeah, I'm going to set up tests. And then I'll be done. At least for today. Let's catch up on the chat. Vitas is asking, how much experience do you think graduate developers should have? So like if you're just graduating out of college or just graduating out of like a coding boot camp, I think entry-level developers, depending on where you're getting a job, typically don't need any experience. Part of being a junior developer is that you're there to learn. It's kind of like I mentioned earlier, like an apprentice role. That said, if you're trying to get a job as a recent graduate, you're going to be competing with other recent graduates that do have like internship experience. So as a college student in your second or probably your second year, you should be looking for summer internships where you can actually get some experience on your resume. Typically, software, computer science, information technology internships actually pay money. It's not like other degrees where you're just an intern that goes and gets coffee and like everybody treats badly. Like as a coding intern, you will actually write code, and you shouldn't do it for free. I tell that to everyone. If someone is having you intern and build them a website for free, like they are exploiting you. Like if you're a software developer intern and you're writing code, you are providing business value, so you should be paid. But my point on that is typically having one or two internships before you graduate helps with actually finding a job out there in the real world. And that's for like someone that's going through college. For coding schools or coding boot camp students, recent graduates, typically you can find a job without an internship, and that's typically because the program that you were in was project focused. So coming out of the program, you have real work that you can show and say, hey, I did this, and this is what I can code, this is my GitHub, all of that. So having a good portfolio and like set of projects allows you to be competitive in the market versus not having experience or not having an internship. So those are my thoughts on that. Oh, that's a good point. Imat is mentioning chalk. So yeah, I use something called colors. I've heard of chalk. Just haven't used it. Terminal string styling done right. It works in the same way. So like chalk.color. That's cool. Pranjal is asking, what Chrome extensions do I use? I use uBlock Origin, which is an ad blocker. I use Stylish, which is custom styles. I use Privacy Badger, which blocks tracking scripts. And then I have Vue and React DevTools. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, there's some other ones. I have one tab, which is really nice. You click a button, and if you have like 100 tabs open, it moves all of those into a single web page. Actually, let me just do it. If I click it, and you can see some of my older stuff, but it keeps it on that web page. And now if you ever want to go back to it, you can just do like restore all, and it opens those tabs up. So that one's pretty sweet. It's called One Tab. I use JSON Viewer. So if I think you're probably seeing that. If I go to a page that has JSON on it, like this, it's nice and formatted. JSON Viewer does that. I have Redux DevTools and then like a screenshot thing. So not a lot, but those are the ones I always install. Hello, Carlos. Welcome to the stream. Pranjal is asking, is it difficult to test Node.js apps which are using multiple threads, using child processes and cluster modules? Probably. I've never done anything like that, but like one of the things about Node.js is it is single-threaded unless you start using something like the cluster module. Or is it a module? Unless you start using clustering. You would just have to make sure that all of your tests could be run standalone. So they don't depend on previous tests, and they won't be affected if another test is running at the same time. So you'd have to write your tests in a more conscious way versus the way we're going to write our tests is we always expect them to be run one after another in a certain order. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to set up tests now. And we are going to be using Jest and Supertest. So let's install those things. So Jest is a test runner. So it has a built-in expectation library, and it's the thing that will actually run all of your tests and like give you the output. Super test is for testing express applications. So basically, you can bring in super test. They typically call it request or something like that, and you can pass in your express app and then test it by trying to request various routes. So like get/user and expect that the content type is JSON and expect that the status code is 200. So supertest allows us to do that, which is nice. So here's what we'll do. We're first going to set up our test scripts in our package.json. And this is going to go here. I think we can just do jest. I like the verbose output of jest, so I'll do -- verbose. But that should handle it. I think by default, it's just going to look at all files that are named test in the folder. Actually, let's see what happens. So if I do yarn test. Yeah, so we actually have test files, but right now they're completely and totally empty. So I'm just going to add some basic tests in there. I don't want to add all of the tests because we actually have stories on the Trello board for going in and testing these routes. I just want to get it set up so that people in the future can add tests. And I am just going to add a basic like index test. Okay, but one of the things about testing is that you typically want to test just the Express app, like the JavaScript object, and you don't actually want to start it up on a port. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to app.js. And then I'm going to, this run server code, I'm actually going to do that in a separate file. But in this file, I'm just going to export the app so that I can test it and I can run it in a separate file. So I'm going to create an index.js that does that, but it actually needs to get the app. So app will be requiring in that app file. And then these things we need in the other file instead. Yeah, like that. So our server should still start up here. If we do npm run dev, it still starts up, but now our Express app is isolated to this one file. So in our test files, we can just require in this Express app to test it. So let's create a basic app.test file. And the way we've decided, you can do this a lot of different ways. Like some projects will have a totally separate test directory and all of your tests will be inside of there. The way we've decided is every controller that will be tested has a test file right next to it. So you don't have to like have a bunch of folders open if you're testing. Like if you look in the API folder, the test file is right next to the controller and the routes. We actually had a big discussion about this. This is how we decided we're going to do it. And because of that, that's why I'm creating app.test right next to app.js. Okay, so first thing we need is a describe. So a describe is your test suite. And so we're going to describe community app backend. And we're just going to do a basic test of like the home route. Yeah, so the home route, if I just request it against slash, we'll do returns this message. So we're just going to do a basic test that says, if I request slash, I should get back this message. So in here, we're going to need super test. And we're also going to need the actual app so that we can request against it. I'm sorry, this is not a file. This is the npm module. And then we'll bring in our app. and then we will test it. So we're going to say request, oh, not that. Well, let's throw this in a variable, because that's what we're going to be testing for. But we're going to say request app. I think, do we have to do like .get? Yeah, so we'll just do .get /. So we want to request the home route. We are going to expect that the content type is JSON because it should be JSON. We're going to expect a 200 status code. And then lastly, we can actually inspect the body. So let's see. Yeah, we can do a dot then. So dot then will actually give us the full response. And then we can use some of the built-in jest expectations to test them. So assert is like a built-in node.js thing. But here I'll actually want to do expect response.body.message to be this message. We don't want that. And this is actually coming from jest. So jest is our test runner. Jest handles the describe and the expects. And then supertest handles actually like requesting the app. This expect dot here is actually from supertest, and that's for expecting parts of the actual request. But then if we want to get deeper than that and test the properties of the object and stuff like that, we can use the actual jest expectations. So let's see what this does. We'll do npm run test. Oh, sorry. We'll do yarn test. And there we go. It detected that app.test. And I did this totally wrong. So all of this test code actually needs to be inside of an it. So describe is the test suite, and then it is for each individual test. So this is where I would describe this test, and I would say it should return a message. Oh, it's not return. Should respond with a message. And really, we're describing like get /. Let's see. All right, so we have one passing test. And we can see app.test passed for a get, and it says should respond with a message, and that has a green check. If, for instance, we gave it the wrong message, it should fail, and it'll tell us why it failed. So that is not right. Maybe I didn't save the file. Try again. To be? To equal? Let's see this. Oh, I think I also need to call done. Do I? Yeah, I guess technically I don't have to use just here. Like this example is showing I can expect the response to look like that. Maybe I do that, but I'm curious why this is failing. There we go. That's a failure. So it says expected this and received this. So typically if your test fails, you can deduce why that actually happened. Should I leave it this way? Maybe not. I could do this also. I think this would work as well. This is using like the built-in expectation. So include the message there and then call done. So what this says is expect a 200 status code and expect the body to have a message in it that equals this. Does that work? Yeah, test pass. I'm not sure which one I prefer. I think I'm going to leave the one that I had, mainly to show people that are coming along that are going to write other tests, to show them that, hey, you can actually use jest in here. I'll just throw a comment like that. Okay. And now I need to add these to my ESLint file. So you notice that ESLint is complaining that describe is not defined in it and expect. In our ESLint file, we can actually tell it that those are valid things. So here we can say globals, describe, it, expect. These are all globals that you should not throw errors about. There we go. Cool. Nina was saying I do need done. I'm curious. Okay, maybe that's why it wasn't failing before? Let's see. I thought that if the promise doesn't resolve, then it would not throw an error. I don't know. Let's try it. Okay, so that passed, but if I make this the wrong message, it should fail. Yeah, and so it failed, but will it still fail if I don't call done? No, it doesn't. So that's good to know. I think one thing I can do, though, is if this returns a promise, then it will detect that it failed. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's the trick. So instead of calling done, we can return request, which ultimately returns a promise. And if the promise fails, then the test will fail. I like that better than having to call done. Yeah, let's do that. Cool. All right, I'm just going to add some basic tests for the other routes, but I'm not going to fully fill them out because I want other people to do that. So here, I'm just going to throw in our basic tests. So this brings in the app. This needs to get / frequently asked questions. So it should respond with the 200 status code. And we're just going to do a basic expect here. We're not even going to expect the body. So this is going to request, instead of the / route, it's going to request /fac. And then we want the same thing for our contributors routes test. All right, now all of our tests should run. Ah! Yeah, so attempted to log, wait, cannot log after tests are done. I think one thing is our app is requiring the database connection. And if we look at our database config, wait. Should this even be exporting anything? I don't think it should. This actually just connects. I don't know. Really, though, we should actually be setting up like a test database that this thing connects to. Let's see what our errors are here. Also, let's look at the Mongoose docs for testing Jest. Testing Mongoose with Jest. To change your test environment to Node.js, add test environment to your jest.config.js. That's good to know. We're going to add that for sure. So we need a new file at this level. Hey. Cannot log after tests are done. Did you forget to wait for something async in your test? Yeah. I think maybe that's happening in a weird order. I'm going to look up mongoose.connect and see what are the options there, because honestly, that could be if they allow us, could be a synchronous connection rather than an asynchronous one, because we really don't want the app to start up until the database is connected. Okay. I don't think we need to log. How about that? We're just going to do that. And I think the thing is, if it does throw an error, we should actually see that in the console. It accepts a callback. It also has a promise. There are events. Okay, connections inherit from Node.js's event emitter class and emit events when something happens to the connection, like losing connectivity to the MongoDB server. Connecting, connected, disconnecting, disconnected. I was thinking maybe we could listen for like the database not connected error. I don't know. Yeah, Nino is saying all async actions will cause this error if you don't wait for the action in the test. The thing is, yeah, I guess, but technically the tests are testing the routes, and the routes shouldn't actually, what is this complaining about? Yeah, technically we should just do this. But the routes don't wait for the database connection to actually be connected. Yeah. Because this is waiting for that route to be requested, but it's not waiting for the database. I don't know if there's a way to wait for the database to be connected. It's a tricky issue though, because I think it's still technically requesting the route, but it's not waiting until the database is connected. Okay, so that's great. just to test this, like, what if we try to connect to something that doesn't work? Yeah. And then this one fails because there's an invalid connection string. Both of these failed. All of them fell because all of them are trying to connect to the database. So I think that's good. So now I guess also if let's give it like a valid URL, but one that won't actually connect. Like let's give it the wrong port. And then hopefully those will still fail because it won't be able to connect. Yeah. Failed to connect to server. And if we look at this, it says failed to connect to server. I think I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Cool. I'm going to add one more test for our admin routes because I don't have those yet. Cool. I'm okay with that. And I think this is good. I think I'm gonna push it up, and I'll get a code review, and people will decide if this should be merged or not. Yeah, I think we're good. That's fine. I think honestly though, so I don't know if I like how this is done. So there's this routes file that imports all of the routes, and then it just immediately exports them. I don't like that. I think routes should export a single router, and then that can be mounted here. And then if you need to add new routes, you would add them in the routes file. I'm gonna change that really quick. So routes is actually going to do something like this, but we're going to need to create a router. So let's create a router. And now this thing exports that. And then in our app, we'll actually, instead of importing each individual one, we'll import the router and then just use that after. Okay, so that's good. And then now over here, we're just going to import, we'll call it routes. And then we'll just say app.use routes. Cool. And so I like this because now the app.js can remain relatively untouched unless we're adding new like middlewares for the whole app. But if we need to add a new route, that gets added in this file instead. I like that. Let's run our tests and make sure everything still works the same way. Cool. That's the beauty of tests. They let you know your app is working. Awesome. I think that's it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to commit this, push it up. Anything else? Actually, there is one thing. This package JSON uses a 4-space tab. And so I want to fix this to use a two space tab because we use a two space tab on every other place inside of this app. I don't know where you would see it. Like here is the two space tab. So I actually want to fix this to use a two space tab. Don't know how I would do that. I don't know if there's a JSON formatter. Indent with two spaces. Validate. There we go. Wait. There we look at that. Two space tab. Oh, I accidentally started the server? Stop that. Oh my goodness. I can literally click run script and it will run it inside of VS Code? I had no idea. That's really cool. That's cool. Okay. But awesome. We have a two space tab. The README, I think there is a separate ticket for updating the README, so I'll leave that alone. We at least told people how to update the .env. Okay, I think we're ready to go. I'm going to catch up on the chat. Well, actually, I'll commit this. Actually, I need to run the linter to make sure that it will commit. Got some warnings. Those are all okay because they're console logs. Okay. That's a lot of changes. Hopefully after this one commit, there won't be that many changes in a single commit. I just wanted to do this all in one commit. Looks good. I'm not committing my .env, so that's good. What did we call this? What am I doing? Cleanup, add middlewares, add tests. And this is interesting. We actually have a, I want to fix that. So we have a pre-commit hook. So before you commit, it runs the linter, but we want it to run the linter and the test now. So before committing, you need to make sure that your tests actually pass. I'm going to add that here. So test lint pre-commit. We're going to do yarn run lint and yarn run test. So before committing, it runs the linter and it runs the tests. Okay, last thing. Add test to pre-commit hook. Watch them, they're gonna run. Yeah, okay, and the test run, and if all the tests pass, the commit works. Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna push this up to the branch with the name CA-86. And then I'm going to open a pull request, and then I need at least 2 approving reviews before this thing will get merged into the develop branch. Typically, I like to have my pull request have the name of the ticket, so that way, at a glance, people can instantly see which ticket that we're talking about. And is there a way to copy this? Yeah. Cool. Okay, so that's my pull request. Oh yeah, I also update package JSON to the 2 space tab. Cool. And you'll notice when I made this pull request, it actually started off Travis CI. So Travis CI is going to run the linter, run the tests, make sure everything's good there, and then I'll need some reviews. So I'm going to request a review from all of these people that have reviewed in the past. And they can actually go in, review my code, ask me to change some things if I need to, and eventually it'll make it back into the develop branch. So that's fun. Okay, I'm going to catch up on the chat. There's quite a few messages. But one thing I will do is I'll take this ticket, which is, where is it? Cleanup backend. And I'm going to move this into dev complete / pending review. So now if anybody looks at the board, that they know that this thing is pending a review, so they'll be sure to check the repo. Once it gets approved, then we can move it into merged and deployed. We'll do a little bit of testing. Once it's been tested, we'll move it into done. Okay, let's catch up on the chat. Oh no, my mouse sharing just quit. Oh, here we go. Okay. Scrolling. Yeah, some people are talking about Nuxt and Vue. Levy is saying you can change the tab size in VS Code in the bottom bar. Maybe you could have, but it was, I think it was a hard-coded 4 spaces instead of actual tab characters, which is why I needed to update it. Like you can see in my changed files. Oh no, it failed! Oh, you know, probably because it can't connect to the database. That's why the test failed. So you can see the checks have failed. I need to add a test database connection to our continuous integration server. I'll do that later. But if we look at files changed, and we look at the package JSON, you can see that it's not just the tab character that changed. Before it was literally 4 spaces instead of a 2-space tab. Ed is asking, what is Husky? Husky is the thing that actually runs can run commands before allowing commits to happen. So this is really great for working in teams because you can have it run your linter, run your tests, run test coverage, maybe do some other things, generate documentation before the commit is allowed to happen. So if the linter failed or if the test failed, it would block the commit from happening, so the developer locally would know that they need to fix those things. This is really just one check in between. So a developer does it locally, that passes the tests, and then the continuous integration server does it on the server, make sure that all of those tests pass, linting and etc. Then it goes through code review, and then it's going to get tested one more time before it actually gets deployed. But this is just like a thing locally that prevents developers from committing when you have linter errors or tests that don't pass. Pranjal is asking how your new tab opens in a dark theme. I think you're talking about Chrome. Wait, not that. Oh yeah, this. I actually have Tab Bliss set up as my new tab thing. You can go to their website, but here you can say you can have images, a solid color. You can put the time, a greeting, all of that stuff. But I then have this set up as my new tab page. I like it. Ooh, interesting question. So Andrea says, at my work, before I commit, I'm required to do git add -p on each file to make sure I'm adding only what I want. What do you think about this? I'm not sure what the -p does. Let's look at the... Oh, does patch show you the... So it's -p, which stands for patch. Does that show you what has changed? So interactively choose hunks of patch between the index and the working tree and add them to the index. This gives the user a chance to review the difference before adding modified contents to the index. This effectively runs add -- interactive, but bypasses the initial command menu and directly jumps to the patch subcommand. I think if you're working on a large team and there are a lot of things changing, it can definitely help. But at the same time, VS Code has this handy-dandy source code changes window. And this will actually show you all of the files that have been changed, and you can individually add them one by one. So if you didn't want to do it in the terminal, you might try doing it here, because once you click a file, I don't have any changes, but actually let's make a change. So let's say in the README, I just like Coding Garden Community App API, Backend. So I changed that. Now if we look in this tab, it shows me my changes. And if I click this, I can see on the left, what was it before, and then on the right, what is the change that I made. And so with this tab, you would actually see all of the files that have changed, and then you can add them individually. So like if I click this plus sign, that's going to add it to the commit. If I click this, it'll actually just discard the changes. That file will go back to normal. So I think that's doing the same thing as git commit-p. I think it's good just to make sure you don't add a bunch of extra stuff, but I think there are other ways to do it as well. There are other Git tools that'll do the same thing. Yeah. Nino is asking, is this how you typically do work at your job? It pretty much is. We don't use Trello. We use a thing called Jira, but it's very similar. We have stories on a board. We have all these lanes. If I'm going to do some work, I'll choose a story. I'll check out a branch. I'll do my work. I'll push it up. We have a column we call ready for QA. So so we have dev complete, which is like waiting for a code review. And then that goes into ready for QA. QA will test it. Once QA has tested it, they'll merge it in and it goes into ready for product. Product will verify that it is working and what the user wants. And then finally it'll go into done. But we do a very similar process. We work in feature branches. Yeah, I don't talk out loud the whole time while I'm working at work. I only do that because I'm live on stream, obviously. But it's pretty much same thing, but CJ's not talking a bunch. Yeah. Some people are mentioning like other ways to indent that file, which I changed. Yeah, so Pramjit is saying it would be interesting to see how you set up the workflow with Git branches. You can check out a stream that I did a while back where I described what we're doing. This one, Agile, Scrum, working on teams, Git workflow. So in that one, I describe how we have our Git workflow set up. I might even show how we set up these card numbers on here. I haven't done a stream where we set up Travis CI, but I could definitely talk about that. Yeah, maybe actually just do a stream dedicated to this whole pull request and merge and continuous integration and continuous deployment process. That would be good. Okay, I'm going to go because pretty soon my friend will be here and he's going to help me lift my bookshelves and my bed. We're going to take it over to my house. I'm going to do some moving. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This was super fun. I know that I need to actually fix the continuous integration. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that I'm not getting the linter error that this person is getting, but it makes sense because we do want a consistent return. For this is not going to be a deployed URL. We'll actually set this up to be like a local test URL. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for watching and commenting and asking questions. We'll see you next time. Hopefully I'll do a Code Kata stream on Wednesday, but until then, watch the Discord, watch Twitter. I'll go live at some point. All right, wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Here's this.